Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Zoomers. Never know how to talk to the Zoom people. So I was asked to give a keynote this morning, and I thought of this verifying soundness of it. No. Just kidding. I'm going to talk a little bit this morning about. I was wondering what to do. I mean, I can talk about my research. I'm pretty good at talking about that, but what can I do that was a little bit different? So I have a talk that I used to give when we recruited honor students, and it seemed kind of it seemed kind of like maybe you guys would benefit about it as well. So what I'm going to give you is 3 pieces of advice free advice that are worth every dime you're paying for it. But I'm going to give you some advice about kind of how I got where I am. If that's appealing at all, maybe you don't want to be where I am, but talk a little bit about how I got where I am, and some pieces of advice that I share with people. So if you know me very well, you know a little bit about where I come from. I was born in a tiny town. When you all landed at the airport, most of you flew here, I think. You landed basically in my family's farms, where I grew up, a tiny little place. There was certainly no airport. There was no interstate. I remember when they built the airport. This is, post 9/11, this is a crazy thing, but when they opened the airport, one of the things they did, the 747 was a brand new airplane, brand new. No one is really good. They flew one to KCI, TWA flew one to KCI, and you could just drive up there and take a ride on it. They would load up the 747 with people, fly it around a few times and land it. So a little bit different times. So I come from a tiny place, 2,000 people. My dad was a banker and a farmer, and my mom was a teacher. My granddad was a farmer. My great-granddad was a farmer. My great-great-granddad was a farmer. You kind of get the message. And boys from my town don't become university professors. They just don't. It's not what we do. It's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something completely different. But I come from a very cool place. I mean, it was awesome to grow up. There's a big field across the street from my house, a creek. Y'all play in the creek when you were kids? People still do that? It was awesome. I used to dam up the creek with mud, and I had a rope swing that I would go. It was awesome, really good. But it wasn't really something you think about academics from. And I think about what I had to overcome, what I had to do to get where I'm going. And I've got some quotes. And I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first of which is self-doubt. Everyone I have ever talked to, I think everyone that I've ever talked to has dealt with self-doubt in some way at some time. Shakespeare, I've got lots of quotes, but Shakespeare, our doubts are our traitors. They make us lose the good we might often win by failing to attempt. You got to start. The first thing you have to do, you got to start. I remember being in this room, in this place, working on my master's degree and thinking about a PhD, thinking about it. I was mortified. Gary Minden, do you even know Gary? Is Gary still? I don't think Gary's here anymore, but Gary, he retired. He's an emeritus professor now. But Gary kept saying you should get a PhD, and I kept saying no. And I finally agreed, but I told him he couldn't tell anyone. And I didn't actually tell anyone I was getting a PhD until after I passed my quals. When I passed my quals, I was okay. But we all fight self-doubt, and I would argue that it destroys more of your dreams than failure ever will. Just the fear of starting. I'll tell you that every proposal I write, every paper I write, it always starts with, can I do it this time? Can I do it this time? And you just have to kind of tell that self-doubt when you're driving in your car, trying to get somewhere. You tell the self-doubt to sit in the back seat. You don't get to touch the steering wheel. You don't get to touch the radio. You listen, but I always listen, but there's always that just slight tinge of, can I do this? Public speaking is probably, so there was a survey and they asked people what their greatest fear was. Death was second. Public speaking was first. And it's a very huge part of what I have to do. So that's something you just got to deal with. But I would also say, if you don't have any doubt, if you don't have if you don't try, you never get to experience what I consider the greatest feeling I can have, which is the moment when I go from not understanding something to understanding something. There is that moment when I understood why the halting problem matters. There was that moment when I understood monads and immediately could never be able to explain them ever again because I understood them. But there's that moment that, and you got to deal with your own self-doubt before you can have that moment. You've also got to fail really fast. Get over it. Get over it. And I work with honor students a lot, and they've all got like 4.3 GPA. How do you get a 4.3 GPA? I don't understand this. You either get all the points or you don't get all the points, and I don't understand this. But they've never failed. They've never struggled with anything. I had a student once that lost a competition for a major university fellowship, and he was furious, absolutely furious. And I couldn't understand why. I said, man, have you never lost before? He said, no. Dude's going into grad school and he's won everything he's ever applied for. Then you're not pushing. You got to fail. You got to fail a lot. I talked to Cordell Green. Cordell Green, anybody know that name? Cordell Green? Cordell Green is responsible for Green's theorem and also responsible for most of what we call AI. He wrote a paper in the 60s. He wrote a paper in the 60s about what is it? It's about theorem proving applied to robot planning, applied to machine learning. He invented logic programming. Very, very famous guy. And he's talking to me about failing. He's talking to me about he won an award from DARPA. He bugged programs by listening to him. Abject failure, completely failed. He loved it. Just tickled to death that he got to do this. Do not concern yourself with failing because you push hard, and fail fast. Get over it, get beyond it, get through it. So I would like to tell you about one particular failure that I was kind of witness to. It was kind of fun. It's a company called Keyhole. The brother of one of my friends shows up in my office. He was in my 140 class, shows up in my office and says, do you know me? I said, no, I don't. You know my brother. Told us, oh yeah, we just told you about this, great. And he said, well, we have a startup company that's failed. And I'm coming back to school to finish my degree. And he said, do you want to see the product? He said it's a way to interactively zoom through a map, and it's kind of, I'm like, well, I'm really busy right now. And I wasn't trying to blow him off. I really was busy, but the company was called People. And they were, the way I say it in the startup world is they were eating ketchup and rice, right? They were down to that point. They had literally run out of money. Keyhole was then bought by a startup company, that pre-public startup company called Google. You ever heard of Google? Pre-startup, Keyhole's name became Google Earth. Failed. The company failed. They had to sell it to Google, and now they're all bajillionaires, and you've all seen it, right? You all know. And why I tell you about sitting in my office, I had a chance to see it before anyone else did, and I said no because I was busy. I had to go to a meeting, and I'm disappointed in myself for that. I should have said, screw the meeting. I'll look at this and give it a shot. So, fail. Just go ahead. Things might turn out really, really well. And I said, you know what Seneca is? Seneca is one of the great Stoic philosophers. Seneca is saying that we're often more frightened and hurt. We make things bigger than they are. Try to tell me, can anybody tell me what you were worried about a year ago? I can't. Might be able to if I look at my notes, but the things that affect us, the things that we think impact us really don't. The second thing I'm going to say is to always push yourself. Nothing that I do, nothing that I teach, nothing that I do research in, that I learn in class. Nothing, literally. Every bit of it is self-taught. Every bit of it is something I've learned on my own. And I think that being restless or being uncomfortable in your mind is a healthy thing. There's a point where it gets unhealthy, but usually thinking about where you want to go, what you want to be, and pushing yourself to get better and learn more, that's a really healthy thing. Search for something that you love to do. When I came back to graduate school, I remember I had a job. They were paying me inordinate amounts of money, just money hose on, squirt me down. I had more money to do it. And Gary Minden grabs me in the hallway after class and said, "When you're graduate school, get paid minimum wage." And I, for some reason, said yes. And I to this day, don't really know why. changed my whole life. I found something I love to do. I really like coming to work every day. It's a really valuable thing. Your passions, the things that drive you, they're not random. They're not, they aren't just come out of the sky. They're telling you something. Should you always listen? No. If you're passionate about, I don't know, pick something. Gilligan's Island, you shouldn't necessarily quit your job to come and go to Gilligan's Island. You know what Gilligan's Island is? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, Lord. You don't know Gilligan's. Sorry, it was a television show when I was a kid. I started my studies, if you know me well, you know this. My clock isn't moving. Okay. I started my studies as a music major. I studied music, and everyone's talked about the fact that, what are you going to do with your music degree? What are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to play music. And I was pretty good. I was an All-American, and I was here on music scholarships. And wow, there was a guy that you ever heard the music from the Star Wars thing? That thing. And anybody watch Deep Space Nine, Star Trek? Don't watch Deep Space Nine. It's a really, really pretty trumpet solo at the beginning of it. It's really gorgeous. That's one of my best friends playing the Star Wars thing and playing The Simpsons. He does the music for The Simpsons. So if you want, I know you guys know The Simpsons. So he's done over 400 movie themes. Just did, if you go see the Indiana Jones movie, he missed our trumpet reunion because he was doing that. So what do you do with the music degree? You perform, you get really good at it, unless you're me, and you discover something else, or you discover that, well, maybe that's not the direction you're supposed to go. I discovered that I was not suited to performing. It's a very hard thing to admit, but I'm not a good performer, believe it or not. I'm not. But I found computer science, and I found that I loved it, and I found it was more creative to me than music was, which seems odd, but I still feel that way. I still feel, for me, the active programming and the active thinking about computing is more creative. So change the world, find the things you want to do, and don't be afraid of them. Right? The last thing you should be is afraid of the things you want to be. And something I have to say a lot is, be comfortable in your skin, be happy who you are, but be restless in your mind. Always thinking about the next thing to learn. I get very frustrated if I'm not learning something all the time. So I love this quote. Yeats, the world is full of magic things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. We wait on the world to come to us, and we shouldn't. We should go to the world. We should get better at seeing. One of the things that I've discovered is when I get really agitated, when I want things to be different, I usually get frustrated and I wait. And that's the last thing you should do. You should take action. So always trying to learn, but also being patient. Trying to get better at something every day. I was joking with my father. So my father and I go to women's basketball games. It's really fun. You should go. My dad and I go. You'll find us sitting. We get to sit in the seats with backs. Try that at a men's game. Women's game. Dad and I sit there, and my father. We're getting out. We're getting in the car. My dad he's in his 80s. He's getting older, and he looks at me and says, "Where's your coat?" I'm like 50 something, and my father is asking me, "Where's my coat?" Like I'm 3. I said, "Dad," I grinned and I said, "Dad, when does it stop?" And he says, it never does. You will always be concerned. You will always love the things that you love. But we also were talking about trying to get better every day. My dad is 80 something years old, trying to figure out how to get more yield from our farm crops. He's installing solar panels, and my dad's a corn beans farmer, and we now have hog barns. So you can take the hog manure, hog poop, if you don't know what that is, and you take the hog poop and you put it on your field. So he's solar, trying to get better every single day. And I deeply admire that, and I need to know, I need to do that for myself. So one of the most frustrating things that a student can say to me is, "I don't need to know that." Right? I'll tell you one more story. When I was hanging out with my buddy Mark Stadler. Mark was a short-time roommate, but he's one of my best friends. And Mark's now, if you have a Macintosh, Mark is the guy that leads the team that builds the graphics stack at Apple. He's done really well. He's done about, I think he said 5 startups, worked at NVIDIA for years. Great guy. We're sitting in a computing center doing SPICE simulations of circuits at 3 in the morning, I think it was. We were not happy at all. And so Mark and I are visiting, and we're grousing. And I said, God, I hate this. We're learning about communication systems, and I don't do that, and I will never do that. This is a waste of our time. And Mark said, yeah. And we have to take the electromagnetics class. I was actually in EE as an undergrad, but I took electromagnetics. God, I hate that stuff. I just hate it. I will never, ever use it. And then I said, and I'm taking a programming languages class. This is a particularly funny one. I'm taking a programming languages class. And we're having to learn this language called Lisp. And I think nobody's ever used it. So we're grousing, and we're reminding ourselves of what we don't need to learn. 6 months later, Mark's at Intergraph starting his career, and I'm starting graduate school. And I'm assigned to a project. I'm not making this up. I am not making this up at all. I am assigned to work on a project where we are developing electromagnetic compatibility algorithms for telecommunications systems in Lisp. All right, all the things I swore I didn't need to know. I said I didn't need to. Almost quit. I was not happy. About a month later, I was really happy, and because I stuck it out, I really kind of discovered all the things I love to do. I also believe very strongly in teaching, obviously, but teaching, everybody should teach. And I really like this thing, inspire a longing for the sea, and the ships will get built. If you're going to be a leader, if you're going to go out and lead an organization, and I hope most of you do, I think most of you will, whether you believe it or not. If you can get your people to believe in what you're doing, they will do it. You can bark orders if you want. You can stand around and say, you will do, you will do, you will do. Sometimes you have to, but if you can get people to believe in what you're doing, your job is over, right? Your job is done. And everybody thinks you're some kind of leadership genius when all you've done is convince people that they want to do the same things that you do. So 3 things: self-doubt, get rid of it, improving, learning to get better, and watching for things that you love, watching for the thing that you love to do. So the last quote I have, and then I'll sit down and let you guys get on with the fun. Wow, Jenny said 20 minutes. I think I'm right on. Oh, cool. So the last quote I have is writing and communicating. A writer, I love this. A writer should have the precision of a poet and the imagination of a scientist. You think it'd be the other way, but it's not. Think about how poetry is written. Very, very, very few words that communicate tons of things. Learn to write, and scientists are constantly looking, constantly building up, constantly finding new things. So that's the way I like to think about my writing, and it's also like the way I like to think about speaking. And I'm going to encourage you to understand that whatever your career is, your ability to communicate is your most important thing, your most important skill. Communicate the things you learn. And one thing I want to emphasize, and I talk about this a lot when I'm doing scholarship interviews and whatnot, being a great speaker or communicator doesn't mean being a great English grammatician. Is that a word? It doesn't necessarily mean not having an accent, not carrying something from where you're from. That's not what it means, right? What it means is the ability to convey your thoughts, and you can learn to do that regardless. And when I go to a PhD defense, and there's someone from someplace not here whose English, whose native language isn't English, I always remind myself that I barely speak English, right? That's it. But I also remind myself that it's about communication. I want to emphasize that to y'all.